It's 1974. Richard Nixon sits in the Oval Office, surrounded not just by enemies, but by investigators, judges, prosecutors, and unseen hands, all closing in at once. The question is no longer just what he did, but who is really writing the story of his downfall. In the shadows of sealed files and whispered meetings, truth and justice begin to blur, until the scandal itself becomes something stranger than politics. Let's return to the events of Watergate here on Things Visible and Invisible. Geoff Shepard is an American lawyer, author, and former White House staff member who worked in the Nixon administration. A Harvard Law School graduate, he served in the White House Domestic Council and later assisted Nixon's legal defense team during the Watergate investigation. Drawing on his insider experience and decades of archival research, he has written several books arguing a revisionist view of Watergate, including The Nixon Conspiracy, Watergate, and the Plot to Remove the President. And he joins me down the line from his home in Pennsylvania. Geoff, welcome to Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you, Sean. It's good to be with you.
I suppose the first question that comes to mind, Geoff, is that after over 50 years, does Watergate still matter?
Well, yes, it certainly does. Nixon, of course, is the only president to ever have resigned from office. And what brought him down and caused him to have to resign is sometimes attempted again with other presidents. You have, particularly President Trump, has been going through somewhat similar full assault by partisan prosecutors. And it's almost that we've seen the movie before. We're also learning a lot more about Watergate and about Nixon as more and more records come to light. So it's very topical. It remains the biggest political scandal in American history in the last century. And there's lots of lessons for people to learn by studying it.
Okay. Well, believe it or not, Geoff, although you are very much embedded in this story in many ways, there will be people watching it who won't even know who Richard Nixon was. So we better backtrack a little bit, and maybe we could start with the fact that Richard Nixon was the vice president, I think I'm saying, in the 1950s.
Yes, he's our 37th president. But when he was elected president, he may well have been the best prepared ever to be president. He was first elected to Congress in 1946 after World War II, and then reelected in 1948. And he beat a very popular Democrat congressman, Jerry Voorhees. And then he ran for the Senate in 1950 and was elected as senator. And then Dwight Eisenhower, who was running for president, picked Nixon in 1952 to be his vice presidential nominee. And he served as vice president of the United States for 8 full years. He then lost his race for the presidency in 1960 to Jack Kennedy, and entered what we think of as his wilderness years. But then he came back from that loss in 1968 at the height of the Vietnam War. You know, the Vietnam War is the most unpopular war in America's history, and it was tearing the nation apart because lots of people didn't think we should be there. Lots of people thought the war was an illegitimate war. But Nixon ran on a platform of 2 items: to end the war, peace with honor was the phrase, and to restore law and order to a nation tearing itself apart over dissent about the war. It was a very close election in 1968, but he had such a successful first term that when he ran for re-election in 1972, it was a landslide. The biggest gap in the nation's history. He won every single state except the state of Massachusetts and the capital in the District of Columbia. 61% of the vote, which was an incredible landslide. But 2.5 years later, the Watergate scandal caught up with him, and he resigned in disgrace. So you have this man, very, very experienced in the public domain for all of his political life. He was president or vice president on the national ticket 5 of the 6 elections through 1972. Nobody else has that record. And yet, 2.5 years later, he resigns in disgrace. And he stayed in disgrace until relatively recently. That's what makes this conversation so timely, Sean. There's all kinds of articles, magazine covers, and stories about the grudging acceptance of Nixon as one of our greatest presidents because of what he did and because of what's coming out about Watergate. Now, let me just summarize very quickly for your audience Nixon's first term. He's known for his foreign affairs interest and expertise. He ended the war, the Vietnam War, with the Paris Peace Accords in 1972. He was the first president to go to China. He had the opening to China, where he met with Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, and that's known as the week that changed the world. He's the first American president to go to Russia to meet with Leonid Brezhnev, and he reasserted American presence and influence in the Middle East. He saved Israel during the midst of the Yom Kippur War. Golda Meir, their prime minister, credits Nixon with saving the nation of Israel. So he loved foreign affairs. He was an acknowledged expert, and I worked on the domestic side. So I can tell you he did wonderful things for the nation on the domestic side also. Now remember, the nation is really tearing itself apart when he runs for president in 1968. And after he won, it's almost that he looked out across the land and he said, okay, who's got a legitimate complaint? Who has a case they're not being treated fairly by the government? And he integrated the Southern schools. They had been segregated up until Nixon took office. And over the fall of 1971, he integrated over 70% of the Southern schools peacefully. He decided there weren't enough women in high levels of government, so he quadrupled the number of women appointed to high levels. He felt our Native Americans were not being treated fairly, and he reestablished the treaty rights to our Native Americans. There was a great deal of controversy by the young who could be drafted and go to the military at age 18, but couldn't vote until age 21. So Nixon helped bring about a constitutional amendment that established the 18-year-old vote. He ended the draft, the much-hated military draft, and he did a number of other things, launched the war on cancer, broke the back of the heroin epidemic in our inner cities, such that his domestic accomplishments are every bit the equal of his foreign affairs victories. So that's Richard Nixon, 37th president, a very thoughtful man, not charismatic, not this isn't the one you wanted your daughter to date. This is a man who thought very deeply about political issues and came up with interesting and creative answers to America's problems at that time, in that era.
Now, we are going to focus in on Watergate, what it was and how it happened. But there's a couple of questions just coming to my mind from what you're saying here, which I think are questions about Richard Nixon that I have. First of all, the 1960 presidential election, which he lost to Kennedy, for today, that would be the end of somebody's political career. They would be forgotten. Whereas he, as you say, there were the wilderness years, and then he came back and won a very, very difficult election, almost against the trend in 1968. What does that tell us about him as a person, never mind as a politician?
Well, the American word that comes immediately to mind is grit. There's a child's toy where you knock down the clown filled up with air, and he comes back up, and you knock him down, and he comes back up. That was Nixon. Nixon never gave up. Nixon never faltered, but he had a struggle from his first election to Congress. He was hated by the establishment, hated by the liberal Democrats, and not really accepted by the liberal Republicans. He was from California, and in those days, I was from California. Californians were considered to be different, and they weren't accepted to the rest of the nation. They were, when they woke up, because of the way the time is kept, they wake up 3 minutes later than the East Coast. So the East Coast was already at work before the sun came up in Los Angeles. And he was born, he's the only president born in California. Ronald Reagan was born in Indiana. But Nixon was born and raised in Southern California. He came from a very devout Quaker household. His mother was a devout Quaker, and Quakers in that era were considered different, almost cultish. So he didn't want to identify as a Quaker, even though he'd been raised that way, because it hurt his running for office. He volunteered, he enlisted. Quakers were usually, in World War II, pacifists, but Nixon enlisted and then asked to go to the front. And he was in the Pacific Theater. He came home a commander in the Navy, and he taught himself how to play poker. Now, Quakers don't play cards, but Nixon learned how to play poker in World War II, and he won $10,000. He came home with his poker winnings, and that funded his first race for the Congress. Now, if you think about it, if you play cards, particularly if you play poker, it's built on being able to bluff. Do you hold a good hand? Your secret 5 cards, are they any good? And you have to learn how to read people. And Nixon became really, really adept through playing poker on how to read other people, whether they were telling the truth, whether they were bluffing, what they held in their hand. And it served him very, very well in politics. So he's a different kind of guy. He's not fun. He's not a jokester. He's very serious, and he works very hard.
You've given us an extremely intriguing psychological profile, Geoff, but also we've got the measure of the man as a consummate politician. This is a man who won many elections, Congress, Senate, Vice President, and then presidential elections. And then a landslide victory, 72, which is very hard to do even today. So let's go to Watergate. Let's begin at the beginning. Can we have the official narrative of what happened?
Sure. It's easier to explain conventional wisdom. Then we'll get to my point of view. June 17th, 1972, but just a few days ago in the calendar, it's June right now, 5 men were caught red-handed having broken into the offices of the Democrat National Committee in Washington, D.C., in what was known as the Watergate office complex. And they were in suits, they had surgical gloves, they had cameras, and they had bugging devices. And the police caught them in the offices. So they came to trial. in January of 1973. The issue was who knew about the break-in. There was the leader, or the assumed leader of the break-in team, was a man named James McCord, who was a career officer in our Central Intelligence Agency, and the other four were Cuban Americans. And the theory was they were trying to learn more about the opponent, about the Democrats who were going to run against Nixon when Nixon was up for re-election in November of 1972. When the indictments came down after a very, very thorough investigation, they identified two other people who worked for Nixon's re-election committee, Howard Hunt and Gordon Liddy, who were really the masterminds. And they had prepared a plan to spy on the Democrat opposition. And the spying envisioned proposals for mugging, bugging, kidnapping, and prostitution. And you can say, oh, Geoff, that's exaggeration. That's just Hollywood. Nobody would do that. But after he was convicted and served a long prison time, Gordon Liddy, who had prepared this campaign intelligence plan, he wrote about it in his autobiography, and he described it in detailed terms. So there's no question about what he was proposing. And the first effort, the initial break-in, went south, blew up, they got caught, and that turned it into an investigation and a trial. And they were all convicted. The five who were caught red-handed and the two masterminds were convicted on all counts in what's called the Watergate burglary trial. But there were lingering worries that a whole lot more people in Nixon's re-election campaign and on his White House staff who knew about the proposed break-in. And there was a cover-up to try to prevent their names from becoming associated with these crooks. And the cover-up worked for a little bit, but then it blew up, and it took a whole bunch of other people down with it. So the three things that are known for sure that your audience can rely on. First, there really was a break-in. They were caught red-handed. There's no question there was criminality. Secondly, there really was a cover-up, because the worry was really senior people knew about this crazy idea and didn't stop it. And that turned out to be true. And the third thing they can know for sure is Nixon really did resign. He resigned in disgrace, remains the only president to have resigned. So that's conventional wisdom. I counted it up the other day. There were 90 individuals who were indicted for some Watergate-related crime. Now, half were indicted for using corporate money to fund Nixon's campaign, for giving corporate money. So we wouldn't even recognize their names. But the other half, the other 45, were somehow involved in one of the break-ins or one of the Watergate trials, or for perjury or something like that connected to Watergate. Nixon not only resigned in disgrace, but 24 members of his administration were convicted and imprisoned. So you had a total wipeout of the Republicans in office in the Nixon White House. When the cover-up collapsed, Nixon appointed a new attorney general. His name was Elliot Richardson. And Richardson agreed with the Congress to appoint a special prosecutor to supervise the prosecution of Nixon's staff members. And that organization that they formed was called the Watergate Special Prosecution Force. And we have a report that they prepared and issued later. And it named all of their staff, all of the prosecutors, all of the the data people, all of the investigators, and there were 156 employees of the Watergate Special Prosecution Force. So this wasn't a small matter. This wasn't 16 attorneys or 12 attorneys or something like that, like we've seen more recently in political scandals in America. 156. They announced at their first press conference that they would investigate every allegation of wrongdoing against Richard Nixon and his administration since they took office in 1968. So what we call the Watergate scandal was expanded by a specially recruited, highly partisan group of Democrats who investigated the Nixon administration. The top 17 Watergate prosecutors had all worked together before in the Democrat administration that preceded Nixon's under Lyndon Johnson. So this was what I term a constitutional inversion. The very people who lost power when Nixon was inaugurated in January of 1969 suddenly were back in charge of investigation and prosecution of the people that displaced them. And this isn't the way our Constitution was written, but it's what was imposed because of the agreement by Nixon's Attorney General and the heavily Democrat Congress. England, I don't believe, can do this, but we can. We do it with some frequency. We have a division between the person or the party occupying the White House and a party occupying the majority of the Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And they were heavily, heavily Democrat when Nixon was elected president. In fact, the Democrats had controlled both houses of Congress since 1932. They continued to control the Senate until Reagan in 1980, and the House until Gingrich in 1994. So in England, as I understand the parliamentary system, the prime minister would have fallen if there was a party vote and they lost. But in America, the president is elected for a term of years, as are the senators and the congressmen. So Nixon was going to be in office until 1976, but for his resignation during Watergate. Now, I've told you it was a loaded investigation.
Geoff, you've told us an awful lot of, that's the official version you've given us, and it's very, very interesting on its own terms. You've also said it in the political context of the early 1970s in the United States, which again is something which a lot of people aren't aware of. Just as you're speaking, there's a couple of things that come to mind. First of all, one of the names you mentioned, Howard Hunt, rings a bell. Am I right in thinking that that's the Howard Hunt who was involved, implicated, or around the Kennedy assassination?
Howard Hunt is a career employee of the Central Intelligence Agency. He was known for his heavy involvement in planning the invasion of Fidel Castro in Cuba. He helped train the Cuban people who were going to go back that resulted in the Bay of Pigs. I don't connect Howard Hunt with the Kennedy assassination, but that's because I don't study those things. I'm a one-trick pony. I worry about Watergate all the time. And I can tell you everybody involved in Watergate, but very little about their other involvement.
Okay, well, let's focus in on this, on Watergate. So you've given us the official version. By all accounts, by your own word, there was a burglary. There seemed to have been a cover-up. There was a linkage, a nexus of some sort between the burglary and the Republican Party. Surely it's just case closed. Is there much more to discuss on this matter?
Well, there certainly is, at least from my point of view, because what happened during the prosecution of the Watergate-connected individuals, it became heavily politicized, and they were out to get Republicans across the board, and they had no place to hide because the Democrats, the specially recruited Democrats, backed by the Democrat majority in the Congress, were investigating everything that came up. And the difficulty was that they would go after people who'd committed crimes, but they would say, we can work out a deal. We can charge you with lesser offenses, but you have to tell us everything you know that was done wrong or questionable by the Republican Party. And it turned out to be a legal pogrom with all of these ongoing investigations. They established 5 task forces within the Watergate Special Prosecution Force, and there was the Watergate break-in. That was one of them. There was the plumbers break-in because of the leak of the Pentagon Papers. That was a separate break-in, but Howard Hunt and Gordon Liddy were responsible for that too. There was the campaign finance scandal where people were giving corporate money, which was illegal, to fund Nixon's campaign. There was what was called the Dirty Tricks Task Force, where people were doing things to the opposition in the campaign to embarrass or to dig out dirt on their opponents. And then there was a particular scandal called the ITT scandal, International Telephone and Telegraph, where they gave, or it was alleged, they gave $200,000 and got let off easy on an antitrust violation. So you had 5 separate task forces, each aiming to bring criminal charges against the most senior people they could find, and get the headlines they could find, and get all the media coverage that made things work. There was this team, this duo of reporters that your listeners may know of, Bob Woodward and a guy named Bernstein.
That's right.
So Woodward and Bernstein were printing articles about the investigation and about the wrongdoing that made them famous. They're very prominent in American journalism, but they were getting their leads from the disgruntled deputy director of the FBI, who was trying to embarrass the FBI leadership rather than to solve the Watergate crime. So you had massive negative media coverage, and you had massive indictments and prosecutions of Nixon and Nixon's people, and it just overwhelmed him. But what happened, and this is where I come into it, this is where the cheating occurred. They hated Nixon so much from the time he first ran for office that they cut corners in bringing indictments and investigating his people. Unlike England, we have a written constitution adopted in the 1780s. And at the end of that constitution, we have 10 amendments that we call our Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights is designed to protect American citizens from excesses by their government. I mean, we just fought England for our freedoms, and we didn't want a strong government coming in and oppressing the citizenry again. So we have 10 amendments, the first 10 to the Constitution, and the one we'll focus on is the 5th. The first is freedom of speech, religion, assembly, and petition. The second is the right to bear arms. The third is you can't quarter troops in our houses. The fourth is bans unreasonable search and seizure. The fifth guarantees due process of law when the government indicts you or comes to prosecute you. And that wordage, due process of law, is what protects you from and guarantees you a fair trial. Now, the Sixth Amendment details some of the things in criminal prosecutions. You have to be open court, speedy trial. Government has to bring their evidence by sworn testimony so you're able to confront your accusers. What happened in Watergate was the prosecution became so intense and so filled with hatred for Nixon and his people, they cheated. And what is intriguing is they left a paper trail of their cheating. So when I come out and I say, look, they did all this wrong. Now, remember, I was there. I lived through it. I knew everybody involved in Watergate. I was deputy counsel during his Watergate defense. Nixon, it turned out, kept a tape system, a tape recording system, and people felt that would show whether he and his people were guilty or not. I transcribed those tapes. That was one of my jobs. I kept the document room that held the seized files, the White House files from all the senior people indicted in Watergate. And I briefed the presidential counselors on what was going on in the Watergate defense. So I lived through this huge national scandal. Years later, starting in about 2003, the scandal culminated in 1974. That's when Nixon resigned. In 2003, I decided to write a book that presented our side that I didn't think the American public had ever learned. And what I discovered in writing that book was these Watergate Special Prosecutors were also government employees. So their records, at least those that survived, are kept at our National Archives. And I could submit Freedom of Information Act requests, those are called FOIA requests, to see the documentation. Well, this was like learning 30 years later that you could see the playbook from the coach of the team that beat you in the state finals in football. And you knew what your team was trying to do, but this told you what the other team was trying to do, where the weaknesses were, who their stars were, what their plays were. And what they were doing is cutting corners on violations of due process. So the most telling and the most significant of what I uncovered was proof positive they were meeting secretly with the Watergate trial judges. Now, at least in this country, you can't do that. If you're going to meet with a judge, the other side has to be present. But these people were not only meeting with the judges, and I can document at least 10 separate occasions when people with an interest in the Watergate prosecutions met with one of three federal trial judges, John Sirica or Gerhard Gesell or David Bazelon. And what is astonishing, even to people to today, is they wrote memos about what they had agreed to. So there's one memo. It's dated December 27th. I have it. It's reproduced in one of my books. And it talks about this meeting on December 14th, where the four top Watergate prosecutors met with the two judges that were going to preside over the Watergate trials. Now, it doesn't matter what they discussed. The fact they met at all should, if it had been known publicly, should have disqualified those people from participating in Watergate.
Absolutely.
And then we have another memo dated February 12th, 2 months later, where the head prosecutor talks about meeting with Judge Sirica, the Watergate trial judge, in secret in his jury room and discussing issues that are going to come out at the trial. And you, as I say, you just can't do that.
Well, let me just ask, Geoff, because what you're saying, I mean, obviously due process is not being followed, which you've set out about the Bill of Rights, etc. But what you're describing is also something very unorthodox, whatever jurisdiction you happen to be in, which begs the question, I guess, why? Why were judges and prosecutors meeting in this way, acting in this way?
The one judge who figures so prominently throughout Watergate, Judge John Sirica, who was chief judge of the District of Columbia area, was an egomaniac. Time magazine, our weekly magazine, named him Man of the Year for his presiding over the Watergate trial. He was so anti-Nixon and so eager to bring out what he called the truth of Watergate that he cross-examined witnesses. He met with the lawyers in secret because he was bound and determined he was going to preside over a trial that brought out the truth of Watergate. That's not the judge's role. That's the prosecution's role. The judge is supposed to preside over the trial and be sure everything is done according to the book. But Sirica had his thumb on the scales. I mean, he was eager and loving the publicity that came from it. It's just, it's hard to believe how far and how far this got with that particular judge. He wrote a book and he bragged about how he was conducting the trial on his own. He told the prosecutor in a secret meeting how Sirica thought the trial ought to be presented. Here's how I think you should put on your case. You can't have an objective judge do that. That's what was going on. The four top prosecutors, the federal prosecutors, they each took their personal records with them when they left office. So this memo that I talk about that describes the meeting of the four prosecutors with the two judges, the memo that describes the meeting in the jury room, Leon Jaworski took those memos with him when he left office as special prosecutor, and they didn't surface until well after his death. He had given his records to his law school alma mater, and they put them out for public consumption. And there were grand jury transcripts and memos in there that just blew your mind. And I'm the first person to see those memos. So that's what constitutes my second book. My second book came out in 2015, and it really focuses on the cover-up trial. The third book that you mentioned at the beginning of this program, The Nixon Conspiracy, that combines that with the record of what the prosecutors did to Richard Nixon when they took grand jury evidence gathered for a criminal prosecution, and sent it undisclosed to the Congress to be used for Nixon's impeachment, which is a political act, not a criminal act. And yet they did this. We knew they sent what was called the report. The nickname of that was the roadmap, because the roadmap was supposed to guide the Congress toward the impeachment of Richard Nixon. But we never learned what was in the roadmap. They said, oh, that's grand jury testimony. That can't be disclosed. So those of us defending Richard Nixon did not know what he'd been accused of by the special prosecutor that was said to be the basis for his impeachment. And that roadmap was not disclosed, not unsealed, until 2018 in response to my court petition. So if you look at it, you can see it today in our National Archives website, but right at the top in red lettering is a notation that says this was unsealed on October 11th, 2018, in response to petition number MS 1344, which was my case, my petition. So I'm the first person to see the records taken improperly by the prosecutors. I'm the first person to see the roadmap disclosed, and it shows they lied in the roadmap. They made up what they claimed was proof when the proof didn't exist. And all of that's come out, gradually seeped out over the past 15 years. So people have been led to believe since 1974 that Nixon was a crook, that his people were crooks, that he approved the payment of hush money to the Watergate defendants when he did no such thing. They considered it. We've got it on tape. I happen to have the transcript of the most famous conversation right on my desk. But what they say the transcript said, or the talk said, isn't what it said. If you study the transcripts, and I have, I did the original transcriptions, what the press is telling you was there isn't there. And this is unfolding slowly. It's trying to push a very heavy rock up a hill because everybody thinks this is all settled and done. But it's not. It's not settled at all.
Can I just ask then, Geoff, because you've in a typical lawyerly way, if I may say, you've given us a lot of facts and a lot of evidence, which is sort of very much thought-provoking, to say the least. I suppose, when we're talking about the JFK assassination, one of the words that's bandied around a lot, I'm not passing any judgment on its validity, but the word coup is often used, i.e. the removal of a lawfully elected president. What you're talking about here seems to fall into the same category. We have a lawfully elected president, in fact, elected, as you've pointed out, through landslide, who is effectively not getting due process of law and thereby being removed from office. Is that too far a stretch?
Well, let's go through that a little carefully. Let's unpack those ideas. And I'm not an expert on the John Kennedy assassination in 1963. But as with every major event, every world-shattering event, there's differences of opinion on how Kennedy got shot, whether it was Oswald by himself, with two or three shots that nobody can duplicate, or a hidden figure on the grassy knoll in Delancey Plaza, where the CIA was upset with him, or organized crime was upset with him, or Cuba was upset with him. Remember, we had a panel, the Warren Commission, that said he was a lone actor. Lots and lots of people don't believe that, and stuff still comes out today, and that's, even older than Watergate. Watergate was the removal of a president, and one of the first books to raise question about how that was done was titled Silent Coup. And that develops a theory, a conspiracy theory, that I don't have any involvement in or part of, that said there was a program run by the CIA to remove Nixon because they thought he was negotiating with the enemy. And the first book was Secret Agenda. The second book was Silent Coup. It has to do with all these questions about the original break-in, how these people got caught, how the police got tipped off, how those people ever got in there in the first place. But that's not my topic. As I said at the beginning, I'm kind of a one-trick pony. My point is an American lawyer's point. Many of the people who were indicted and convicted in Watergate really broke the law. They were caught red-handed. There's no question about that. But no matter how heinous the crime, no matter how despicable the defendants, Our system says you get a fair trial. And my point, consistent throughout all my books, is these people didn't get fair trials. In the hysteria of the moment, evidence that would have helped them was suppressed. The jury was poisoned because of the adverse publicity and the political nature of the prosecution. And even in the appeal, when they went to the first level of appeal, there was a secret meeting to stack the deck of the appellate judges. So from the beginning, throughout the investigation and the prosecutions, they didn't get due process. Now, lots of your listeners will say, so what? If they were crooks, they were crooks. But that's not the way our system is designed. Our system says you get a fair trial, then we hang you.
Right.
But we don't just move right to mob justice.
No. Geoff, unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time together. We could go on for another few hours. This is absolutely fascinating. However, people are just going to have to purchase one of your many books. Tell people where they can find out more about you and indeed where they can pick up a copy of one of your works.
Sure. It all sits on my website, Sean. You can find the books, you can find the memos, you can find the appendices, all the documents. And that website is www.shepardonwatergate.com. And you got to spell Shepard correctly. Shepard. So it's www.shepardonwatergate.com. All of my publications, all of my videotapes, it's designed to share with people what I've uncovered in 20 years of research. So that's where they should go start. There's some documentary movies that came out recently. There's all kinds of presentations like this one. This will be posted on my website when you tell me where the link is. Thank you for inviting me onto your show. I get really deep into this. I feel badly for my wife, who puts up with my talk all the time. But it is my obsession. I do believe Nixon and his staff were poorly treated, and I'm bound and determined to share all that with the world public. Thank you again, Sean.
Geoff, for now, thank you so much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
All right.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.